All right, let's talk about something that seems to completely break one of the biggest rules in biology, altruism. We've all heard the phrase survival of the fittest, right? It paints this picture of a cutthroat world where only the selfish survive. So how in the world does a selfless act, an act of sacrifice, fit into that picture? Well, that's what we're going to figure out.
This is the core question that has fascinated biologists for ages. You see it everywhere in nature. A tiny bird letting out a loud screech to warn its friends about a hawk, basically putting a giant target on its own back. Or a bat sharing its hard-won meal. It just doesn't seem to make sense from a purely selfish point of view. So, what gives? And here's the conflict, laid out plain and simple. On one side, you have this massive foundational rule of evolution. Natural selection favors the individuals who are best at surviving and making babies. But on the other side, you have altruism, these acts that literally decrease your own chances of doing exactly that. It feels like a total contradiction. How can both of these things possibly be true at the same time?
So that brings us right to our first section, the altruism paradox. And you've got to understand, this wasn't just some small academic curiosity. This was a huge thorn in the side of the theory of evolution. And it took decades for scientists to really start untangling it.
First things first, let's get our definition straight. When biologists talk about altruism, they're not talking about getting a warm, fuzzy feeling inside. It's a cold, hard calculation. An action is altruistic if it helps someone else, but it costs you something, whether that's energy, resources, or even putting you in danger. So here's the paradox in a nutshell. Imagine that bird that gives a warning call. By doing that, it draws attention to itself and maybe gets eaten. The selfish bird next to it stays quiet, stays safe, and lives to have lots of little selfish baby birds. You'd think that over thousands of generations, the selfish gene would win out, and the altruistic gene would just disappear. But it hasn't, so why not?
Well, the first big breakthrough in solving this puzzle came from a shift in perspective, a realization that maybe the individual isn't the only thing that matters. Sometimes it's all relative.
And this is the core idea behind kin selection. Think about it this way. What if natural selection is really playing the long game, focusing on the survival of genes, not just individuals? You share a whole bunch of your genes with your family. So if you do something that costs you your life, but it saves, say, your 3 siblings, well, those siblings carry copies of your genes, including, maybe, the very gene that made you act selflessly. So in a strange way, your genes are helping themselves by helping your family.
And what's really amazing is that this whole complex idea was boiled down into a beautifully simple little mathematical formula. It's called Hamilton's rule. You can think of it as the cheat sheet for when it makes evolutionary sense to be nice.
Let's break that down real quick. The C is the cost to you for doing the helpful act. B is the benefit the other person gets. And R is the magic ingredient. It's how closely related you are. The formula says that an altruistic act makes sense if the benefit to your relative, multiplied by how related you are, is bigger than your own cost. It's why you do a lot more to save your brother, who shares half your genes, than you would for a third cousin.
And this isn't just a theory, we see it play out with animals like vampire bats. Now, for a vampire bat, missing a meal for just a night or two can be a death sentence. They can literally starve. So what happens? Bats that have had a successful night of hunting will actually regurgitate some of their blood meal to feed a hungry neighbor. And here's the kicker. Who do they share with most often? You guessed it, their relatives. It's a perfect real-world example of kin selection.
Okay, so helping family makes evolutionary sense. But that doesn't explain everything, does it? We help our friends, we cooperate with people we're not related to. For that, we need another piece of the puzzle, a concept you could call "you scratch my back."
And you guessed it, we are going right back to our little vampire bat friends. Because it turns out, while they do favor their relatives, they also share their meals with unrelated bats. So kin selection is clearly a big part of the story, but it's not the whole story. There has to be something else going on.
And that something else is called reciprocal altruism, and it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's the I'll scratch your back now, if you scratch mine later strategy. I'm going to take a small cost to help you today, with the unspoken understanding that when the tables are turned, you'll do the same for me.
Now, for this to actually work, you need a few things to be in place. First, you have to be likely to see that individual again. You also need to be able to recognize them and remember what they did. Keep a mental tally of who's a giver and who's a taker. And, this is really important, there has to be some kind of social cost for the cheaters, the ones who take but never give back.
A fantastic example of this is the cleaner fish. These little guys set up shop on a reef, and giant predators will actually line up to let them swim right into their mouths to pick off parasites. It's a great deal for everyone. But if the little cleaner fish gets greedy and takes a bite of the big fish's healthy tissue, it cheats. That client might chase it off, or at the very least, it's not coming back to that cleaning station again. That threat keeps the whole system honest.
All right, so we've covered helping family and helping those who will pay us back directly. But what about helping a total stranger that you'll never see again? How does evolution account for that? Well, this brings in another, even more complex layer, the power of reputation.
So here's the difference. Direct reciprocity is a simple two-way street. I help you, you help me. Indirect reciprocity is a little wilder. It's more like, I help you, and then some third person who saw me being a helpful person decides to help me later on. It's like my helpfulness itself becomes a kind of social currency.
And you can see how this just explodes in human societies. We are obsessed with watching each other. We talk, we gossip, we're constantly building a mental model of who in our community is a cooperator and who is selfish. And when it's our turn to lend a hand, who are we more likely to help? The person with the good reputation, of course.
Okay, so we've looked at this from the level of the gene and the level of the individual. But what happens if we zoom the camera out even further? Well, that gets us to the idea of group selection, or winning as a team.
Now, the old school idea of group selection had some issues, but the modern version, which we call multi-level selection, is a lot more powerful. It basically says this: sure, within any single group, a selfish individual might be able to get ahead. But if you have two groups competing against each other, a group full of cooperative altruists is going to wipe the floor with a group full of selfish backstabbers almost every single time.
And if you want to see the ultimate example of this, just look at social insects like ants and bees. A beehive basically functions as one giant superorganism. The individual worker bees are sterile, they can't even reproduce, and they will literally sacrifice their own lives at a moment's notice to defend the hive. It's because the individual worker doesn't matter. The colony is the unit of survival. The cooperative team wins.
And this brings us to our final section, where all of these different ideas come crashing together. Us. Humans. We have all of these basic biological drivers for cooperation, but then we went and layered on some pretty unique abilities. You could call it the human upgrade.
I mean, just think about it. We build huge systems of cultural norms and laws specifically to enforce cooperation, often between millions of complete strangers. We have this incredible capacity for empathy, to actually feel what others are feeling, which is a powerful motivator to help. And on top of it all, we create these complex moral and ethical codes, shared stories and principles that allow for trust and cooperation on a scale that is just unheard of in the animal kingdom. All of these things take our natural tendency for altruism and just turn the volume up to 11. So all of this leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought. The whole story of altruism really forces us to go back and reconsider that famous phrase, survival of the fittest. What if fittest doesn't actually mean the strongest or the fastest or the most selfish individual? What if, all this time, the true winners in the game of evolution are the ones who are best able to connect, to help, and to cooperate?